to our show. And now we have with us here Jefferson Alviso to talk with us about a recent struggle in Brazil. There was a 19-year-old Afro Brazilian male by the name of Pedro Gonzaga who was killed by a white security guard, an armed security guard. And the response has been major demonstrations across cities all across Brazil. And we're going to speak a little bit about that situation and the current situation with organizing efforts around the oppressed communities there in Brazil regarding the indigenous populations, the Afro Brazilian populations, and other groups that are struggling and fighting back against their oppressions.
Hi, how you doing, Rhys?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. Great to be here again.
All right, so first let's look at what exactly transpired at this event. What started these demonstrations and all this?
Well, the demonstrations started because of the murder of a young man in a supermarket. The security guards, after a struggle in which the young man got his gun, but then after that things got on, the gun was returned and everything seemed controlled, and somehow the situation escalated again. And this time the ending wasn't a good one, especially to the victim and his families and loved ones. The security guard got him into a choke, and in spite of people warning him that he was holding him for too long, that he already was passed out, he continued choking him, and eventually he came to die. Pedro Henrique is his name.
There was a large response from the oppressed communities and all across the sectors of the working class in Brazil that were very alarmed and outraged by this, and they came all across. There was demonstrations, and it was a Black Lives Matter moment there in Brazil under a hashtag, with the translation being a Portuguese translation of Black Lives Matter, and many folks that have been organizing with different organizations in Brazil. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about some of those demonstrations and stuff.
Yeah, there was demonstrations all over, especially in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo, the two biggest cities in the country. Also the two cities with higher number of police homicide as well. I'm not sure about there is a Black Lives Matter movement in Brazil, but yeah, there were people that would signs that translate to the Black Lives Matter, which in Portuguese it's Vidas Negras Importam. The movement for black liberation in Brazil and recognition as human beings, it's kind of, there's not just one organization. There's a lot of organizations and individuals as well, collectives that work together. So there is not one organization, single organization who takes the whole issue with them. It's also a long struggle since the times of slavery. The movement for black freedom has existed too. But the demonstrations, like I said, people were staging dyings, and some other people had signs, like you said, against not just the security guards, but the police state that has been implemented in Brazil.
And when you saw this, you told me that you saw a lot of parallels with Eric Gardner, and that was one of the things that came to your mind. Can you tell me a little bit about Eric Gardner, of course, was murdered by police in New York, suffocation, and kind of some of the parallels of oppression that's faced here in the fascist United States and the growing rise of fascism in Brazil under Bolsonaro?
Oh, yes, definitely. The first thing that came to my mind was Eric Gardner. I saw, again, it seems like a deja vu. The situation, like people warning the security guard, he's joking, you're killing him. Like Eric Gardner saying, I can breathe. And Pedro Henrique's mother, she was begging the security guard to stop. There's no, and other people that were there as well, even some other workers that were there told him, hey, hold on, no, stop. But he continued because for the security guard, in my opinion, it's just a matter of exercising his power and his revenge. It's also, I think it's important to point out that the family of Pedro Henrique, they were considered like middle class, high middle class. And the reason why I'm pointing to that is because it's not to be like classist or anything. It's because a lot of people in Brazil, especially like the anti-black liberation movement, in which many Afro Brazilians are members of. Just like in the United States, they tell you, oh no, if you work hard, if you go to school and you do this and that, there's no racism, just the bad people, the thugs, the criminals, they're the one who die. If you're not doing anything wrong, nothing's going to happen to you. And I guess that's a wake-up call to people that think like that, because white supremacism is very real, and they send a signal to you. Doesn't matter now what you do, you always going to be under the boots of white supremacism. You can die anytime. No matter if you went to school, if you made in the capitalist system, by its rules. So it's a wake-up call. And in Brazil, that's the anti-black movement. It's growing a lot, just like you mentioned before, especially now with Bolsonaro. Racism, sexism, LGBTQS, oppression, all those things that they were actually working together, not just the black liberation movement, but the other oppressed groups, indigenous people. They're working together and gaining a lot. Now, a lot of progress was made, especially during the PT administrations. And that was kind of thorn on the side of the fascists in Brazil. And now they're trying to basically take it all back. And there's a thing that Brazilians say, a lot of Brazilians, especially the right wing, the fascists, the reactionaries, they call, this is me. Me is like a slang that basically you're just being, you're just like making yourself a victim, victimizing yourself without a reason. So when a gay person or a transgender person complains of being targeted or being offended by a slur or something, or a black person, they are, come on, there's nothing wrong with that. In the old days, there wasn't a big deal, so it shouldn't be a big deal right now. If a black person doesn't feel good by being called a monkey, no, that's one of the things they call it me. You're just being victimized. There's nothing wrong with that. If a woman gets touched, by a man without her consent, or being called names that are inappropriate, it's the same thing if she complains. So basically, what the Bolsonaro government it's doing, it's propagating those philosophies that makes people that they're oppressed not to have the right to complain, and they have to be happy because you were the minority, quote unquote minority, and being entertained by that. By I mean the people in power, mostly white, middle class with a decent education and good jobs and good housing.
Yeah, it has a lot of parallels with the Trump rise and the Bolsonaro rise, and the ways that Bolsonaro, in a lot of his campaign speeches, he made insensitive comments to Afro Brazilians, to the indigenous populations, to LGBTQ, two-spirit peoples, and now there's a lot of struggle going on with the indigenous populations against a lot of these new attacks coming from the Bolsonaro regime against the indigenous populations. Would you be able to talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, I think it's important to point out that it's not Bolsonaro is just the head figure, the most famous, but there's a lot of people behind them. The white supremacist fascist philosophy. It's old, but during the PT government, they were kind of down because, like I said, the movements came out. So now they're going out. But going back to your question, yes, the indigenous people, they're being murdered, just like the black people and transgender people, gay people, they're being murdered and assaulted in Brazil. But the reason for the indigenous peoples and the black people, especially like the quilombolas and trade unionists as well, is because they have their lands. In their land, there are things that they are very covered by the capitalists, especially like the multinationals. They want that, not just the land, but the wood, gold, minerals in general, things that they can make a profit of. Water as well, oil. So they've been pushed out of the lands, and even indigenous people that they're being like for centuries without having any contact with white people, they're being murdered. Babies are being found murdered, and the quilombolas losing their lands, murdered. Trade unions being, especially if you're from the landless peasant movement and the Movimento dos Trabalhadores Sem Terras, the movement of the workers sem teto, I'm sorry. Movement of the houseless workers. I'm sorry for the confusion here. But basically, social movements that gather a lot of people. Those movements, they're huge in Brazil, and they continue. The work that they're doing is great, empowering people. Like the landless peasant movement, and it's more famous, but they work in conjunction with the MTST as well, which they do. The MTST, they go to properties that are abandoned, and they take over and make the workers who should be the owners, who are the legitimate owners of those properties, take those properties inside the cities. That's very important to point out too, because they will say, oh, why don't you just build like housings for the workers like 2 hours away from the place where they work or they live? That's no, ludicrous. Kind of like in Los Angeles, people have to do that, and in Brazil that doesn't work, and it's not working here as well.
And what kind of perspectives do you see for building that resistance, and how can we support the oppressed peoples in Brazil who are struggling against their oppression and fighting for a better future there in Brazil, and building solidarity with the Bolivarian Revolution and other progressive movements in Latin America?
I'm glad you brought that question up. You just said your last phrase, like the Bolivarian movement. It's the key, because the way that we can win, not just in Brazil, but in the West and Venezuela and Yemen and Palestine and everywhere Syria, everywhere that we have the imperialism boots on our throats. It's through solidarity and mass movements. The reason why I think that the Bolivarian is one, because there's a lot of people that are supporting that, and that's the reason why the U.S., with the help of Brazil and Colombia and other U.S. puppets government like Peru and Chile, they haven't been able to take over Venezuela and destroy their gains. It's due to solidarity. Even people that don't agree with Maduro, they realize that, hey, I have nothing to gain from that. And I think that's the working class in general, even the most privileged ones, they have to see themselves as workers, as part of the working class, and unite. Because, okay, you might have a job now, you might be able to send your kids to university, and you went to university, you might have a car, but all those things, no, it's just a matter of time until you lose them, and then you realize that you just a tool to be used by the capitalist system. But mass movements are important, solidarity, showing demonstrations and organizing, and also united with labor. I think it's very important, because labor need to be part of this. A great example is apartheid in South Africa, how labor helped end apartheid, especially like with the unions in the United States refusing to ship things that was gonna go to oppress the black people in Africa. So, and there was a little example of that into Palestine a few years ago here in Los Angeles. We helped make sure that one ship that came from Israel couldn't be unloaded, and the workers, they were solidarity. They refused to work and unload that ship for a couple of days. It sent a warning to the Palestinian oppressors, the oppressors of the Palestinian people, that labor might be waking up again. And again, we see all the things that we talk about, and solidarity. It's important now also to take the migrants case, migrants from Latin America mostly, but also migrants that goes to Europe as well, mostly from Africa. And what does those migrants have in common? Their countries are being ravaged by U.S. imperialism and their puppet regimes, like England, France, and all the other ones that work along with them. And they're victims, and now they have no way to go. And in place like Venezuela, what's going to happen if the United States invade? Place like Brazil, what's going to happen if what Bolsonaro's government's doing continue to grow? And by that I mean the oppression of indigenous people, black and other oppressed groups. Where they going to go? They're going to be like the Palestinians in their own land, so second-class citizens, or like the Africans in South Africa, second-class citizens. So it's something that needs to be talked about, and people need to realize that they struggle, although different, it's the same, because the oppressor is the same. It's capitalism.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.